All right, we'll go ahead and get started here, and want to welcome everybody back to our webinar series. And this is our third evening that we've been joining together. This is being hosted by the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. So if you haven't been on the webinar series yet, my name is Jen Bentley. I'm a dairy field specialist in Northeast Iowa, and I'm joined by my colleagues Fred Hall, who is in Northwest Iowa. He's going to be facilitating the Q&A portion here tonight. And then our guest speaker, Dr. Larry Tranel, who's also a dairy field specialist in Northeast and Southeast Iowa. So you'll notice on the screen here, I do have just a couple of housekeeping things. I know there was some questions about, if the webinar is going to be recorded and archived, and I will put the link to the past presentations where those are hosted on our YouTube channel. And then once we get the publication and PowerPoints voted as PDFs, we'll be sending out a follow-up email to all the participants of the webinar series. So you'll have all 4 sessions in one email once we conclude this. So we have one more session coming up next week, and then we'll conclude and get the follow-up email sent out to the group. So just a couple things there. And then I also do want to remind you at the end of the webinar, if you could also fill out the evaluation for tonight's presentation, that'll help us with our program here and moving forward with any type of webinar series like this again. So again, tonight's topic is going to be focusing on dealing with the stresses of men, women, and children. So we're kind of breaking it out with all of them. And I do want to start tonight by offering up some poll questions to kind of gauge our audience again. So as you see that being launched here, our first question of the night is, have you seen a need for more awareness and ability to deal with farm or family stress of a parent, spouse, sibling, or child? So in this session, dealing with more of the farm or family stress of our parents and spouses, siblings, and children. So it looks like we have about 22 people on here tonight, Larry, and about half of them have participated in the poll. So.
And sometimes I wonder how COVID has been affecting this, but we definitely know from a mental health standpoint that it has been affecting a lot of the mental health, not just the farmers, but everybody.
Yep, with school schedules being mixed up, children are kind of in different places as well. So that definitely impacts them. So I'm going to go ahead and end that and share that out. So about 50% of you said yes, 38% said somewhat, and 13% said no. And then we'll also have one more question here. I'll get that loaded here. And so this is a 2-part question. In general, who experiences more farm stress is our first question. So men, women, or children. And then the second question, in general, who experiences more family stress? So kind of separating out the farm from the family there. And we'll let the answers come in here. And
it's pretty interesting as these results are coming in, just when you take a look at trying to combine the two. That's why it's so difficult to answer the question when you combine them together, because it might be different pieces that different players might be experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. And they're all kind of intertwined too, as you take a look at trying to deal with the farm and the family life. So I'll end the poll there and share that out. So it looks like they thought 78% thought men experience more farm stress, and 89% said women experience more family stress. So I think, Larry, that's kind of what you're going to be covering here tonight, is dealing with the farm and family stress. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen while you get your presentation loaded up, and I'll do your introduction. For those of you who haven't been on our webinar series, I'd like to introduce our featured presenter here tonight, Dr. Larry Tranel. He spent 10 years as a dairy farm management agent with the University of Wisconsin Extension, and the past 21 years as a dairy field specialist with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Larry is a graduate of the UW-Platteville, where he earned his bachelor and master's degree and holds distinguished alumni honors. He's also an ordained minister and holds a doctorate in pastoral psychology, which has really sparked his interest and expertise in farm stress and behavioral health. I think you bring that good mix of dealing with farm families and the behavioral health that goes behind that as well. So welcome to the webinar, Larry.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Jen. And Jen, if you could take the poll down. Is that just online? All right, thank you.
So welcome to our program on rural resiliency, caring for you and yours. So tonight we're going to talk about the stress of men, women, and what do you tell the kids and the stresses that are on children. And then next week we'll talk about the brain and behavioral health hacks. We're going to talk about thanks to our cooperators. Basically, I listed them before with the diocese, and when we take a look at some of the synods and some other agribusinesses and other organizations as well. When we take a look at the University of Guelph, some of their research, they've demonstrated a correlation, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but it's not a causation, between the mental health of farmers and the production and health of the dairy cattle herds. So we're not basically saying with that causation that the health of the cattle may actually help the mental health of the dairy farmers, or it could be vice versa. So again, it's a correlation between the two, but we're not sure where the causation comes from. When we take a look at the weight of distress, and how that can weigh down on people's minds and weigh down on their bodies. And on the opposite side, we talk about the strength of resiliency. So just to illustrate it, I asked my wife to take a little picture of me while I was doing some weightlifting. Just kidding. But when we take a look at mind over matter, when something's the matter, when something is highly distressful to us, how do we develop that resiliency? Because that weight sometimes can be so overbearing in our minds and in our bodies as well. And so we take a look at that weight that we carry on our shoulders sometimes in this situation, whether it be stress or distress. And then we take a look at that picture on the wall. And we might think that our weight is not that big compared to the weight that some people are trying to carry, or that goal of what we're trying to work towards. So mind over matter, when something's the matter, no matter what's the matter. And so then we need to look at how do we face the challenge with courage. And so then my wife asked me to take a picture of her lifting some weights. So when we take a look at the thought process of the mindset that I got this, I can do it. And when we take a look at anything that we have with stress, how can we just, like in our lives, at least do something? Okay, not just wallow in the stress, because that just kind of makes it magnify the worry of that stress, but do something and shorten that distance between that stressful event and what we got to do to overcome it. When we take a look at how Americans are feeling, this pandemic in 2020, 2021 has definitely been a significant source of stress in most people's lives, as they would attest, 78% of the adults. The economy itself, with all the shutdowns and with all the restrictions, the masking, has also been a significant source of stress, nearing levels that reported back in 2008 when we had the major recession. So younger people, ages 18 to 23, noting that in the prior 2 weeks of the survey, they felt so tired that they sat around doing nothing. Okay, and so they're the most likely age group to experience common symptoms of depression. So we take a look at that age group, out and about, meeting people, this, that, and the other thing. And a lot of stuff was restricted, so it's probably no surprise here. So say that pandemic has made their planning for their future feel impossible. 51% of the teens aged 13 to 17, and you think of those that are preparing for college, still going through their high school years, and interruptions and things like that that have happened. So despite the numerous stressors, 71% of Americans say that they feel hopeful about their future, which is a very positive thing, because again, that word hopeful and then just what hope does within our lives is extremely important to us. So I would also try to say that this is not just because of the pandemic. Other different types of social, political tensions and things like that that happen in society as well, along with the economy. There's a lot of things that kind of come up to the situation of how Americans are feeling. So farmers allow us to live our lives. This is an article I wrote a few years back about just talking about the importance of what farmers are to us in a society, because farmers give us so much freedom as they risk their lives and their finances so that we don't have to produce our own food. We can go about doing whatever we want. So the bottom line is that our farmers have a very necessary work, resiliency for risk and for hard work that would put most of our professions to shame. So thanks to our farmers who protect us, they protect our freedom of time so we can do whatever we want, like I said, in our professions and other things we want to do, and also keep 90% of our disposable income in our pockets. So the bottom line is be proud of who you are as farmers and also for what you do. In one of the other sessions, I showed this graphic about resilient people being more proactive or less reactive or passive. And I think it's so darn important for us to realize that, because when we take a look at a personality trait, there's a lot of personality traits that we take a look at. In our previous session, we went through a few of those. But the locus of control actually shows up as a personality trait in different profiles. And I think it tends to impact farm success a lot. And basically, what it's showing is that those people that have this internal locus of control, those people that are more active, they try to control what they can, are proactive, okay, they tend to have a very high level of this internal locus of control versus the reactive people and the passive people that tend to have this external locus of control, that things are beyond their control, they're in somebody else's in control in how I live my life. So again, the bottom line is that resilient people do something about situations. So who experiences farm stress? Okay, I would tend to say all farmers experience it, but to different degrees. Younger farmers tend to have more stress than older farmers, which would make sense as they're still trying to build careers, build their finances, might be in higher debt loads, still trying to raise families and things like that. So the dairy or the mixed operations enterprises are more stressed than grain or single product type enterprises. I don't think that's a big surprise either, with all the day-to-day, hate to say drudgery, but just a lot of chore tasks that dairy farmers and those that are doing mixed enterprises tend to do. So farmers that are employed off the farm are more stressed than full-time farmers. When we take a look at women who experience farm stress in their responsibility for the home, for the family matters, possibly also working off the farm, so a double stressor there. A farm woman with an off-farm job faces very difficult demands in addition to being the traditional nurturer for the rest of the family as well. When we take a look at stereotypes and gender roles relative to assertiveness and those personality traits, as well as with assertiveness and also with confidence of who they are in that role as farm wife. So worldwide access to credit and resources, and 90% of the stress research for some reason on farm stress is tested on men. So women tend to and also befriend, which allow women to deal with their stresses a little bit better as well. When we take a look at over 50% of farm women experience time stress, often or very often. Okay, again, no surprise there. Farm women face higher levels of social, psychological stress than men, again, due to these multiple roles. So there's a story kind of being told that's actually very congruent from one study to the others. So when we also take a look at the role of higher emotions, as we talked about personality types, and that women tend to have higher levels of emotion, both positive and negative. Okay, and sometimes those negative emotions tend to be a little bit higher even. But how does that role of higher emotion play into all this stress as well? So when we take a look at symptoms of anxiety and symptoms of confusion because of all these multiple roles in balancing farm and non-farm family community activities and how that relates to just the psyche of women on the farm. Spousal equity, children, off-farm work, life events, role conflict. We talked about that in our the daughter-in-law and just the role of the farm wives, the spousal support, their mastery of different types of things, the farm values, and the perception of what's at stake here are all predictors of farm stress that equally or even more so may affect farm women. So what can we do? Individual self-care concepts, time management assistance, peer networks, support groups, personality, relationship understanding, assertiveness to refine expectations in both farm and family management, I think is a huge one for women. So the reality of what women can live up to communicate the priorities of farm and the family to the spouse and to the extended family. And last night, or in the last session, we actually went through a few in the Q&A session of about a few of those concepts there as well. So we're going to switch gears here a little bit and take some input from our colleague Jen Bentley, who wrote and helped me write an article from one dairy girl to the next. So it's kind of a concept of how do we help ourselves focus on you as farm women. So the concept is kind of an acronym, Dairy Girl, to deep breathe, active goals and exercise, to implement change, remember who your team, the why, gratitude, increase happiness, restore mind, body, and soul, and learn every day. So let's just kind of walk through these. So the deep breath, we've talked about that in the first session of how to start your day with a deep breath to inhale the future and exhale the past. Today is a new day. It's a new day dawning. And use these deep breathing techniques to reduce our stress until a new plan can be made when we're under stress. How do we take time for ourselves? 10 minutes daily to plan different types of chores, household grocery lists and meals and things like that, and try to get more order within our lives. How do we stay active? So we talk about the SMART goals. Keep them in front of you. Again, be proactive, that internal locus of control in trying to achieve and also to share those goals as a farm family, because that assertiveness, I think, actually plays into part, as I just mentioned. And know that procrastination increases stress, okay? Reducing that distance between that stressful event and overcoming that stress. Just do something, because again, procrastination, waiting, wallowing in that stress actually can increase it. We also realize that exercise reduces the stress. We talk about that quite a bit, just the ability to stay active. When we become a couch potato and start taking a look at just need to think I need to relax and grab some munchies and watch TV, sometimes the worst thing we can do to try to reduce our stress levels. How do we implement change and try to spell challenge without the word change in it? So we realize that change is a given in life. Not all change is good, but it's undoubtedly a given that we need to deal with. So how do we create reframes? So instead of I can't change the milk prices or I can't work with him and her, I can change this part of it, what I've got under control, and then try to follow through whatever it is that we can try to reframe the context from something that might be pretty negative in our lives to something a little bit more positive, and try to look at the bright side of people's intentions and what we need to do. So remember who's on your team and surround yourself with positive people. I think it's extremely important because you tend to become like the people that you hang around. Talk more about constructive thoughts and ideas and less about other people, because we realize what gossip can actually do within farm families and some of the conflicts that arise because of something somebody said. Remember, you become like the 5 people you spend the most time with. So who do you want to become? Who is that futuring you? Maybe even trying to journal who that future is, because we need to put this to be list as much as a to-do list. And who do you want to bond with in who you are as a person? So the why, again, hopefully everybody's got a why. Okay, she who has a why can bear almost any how. So how do we take a step back and practice that self-awareness of that big why, the larger efforts within our lives? So visualize what's important and why, and I think research will show out that visualization of your future, that visualization of the horizon. Those things are actually pretty important to people's psyches. But if a crisis occurs, don't get stuck in the why this, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. Okay, we need to move on. So gratitude, a lot of research around gratitude. So look up and around for the beauty that is around you, those blessings, that attitude of gratitude. Create a gratitude journal, 3 things daily. And people say research wise, even just writing those things down that we're thankful for, those things that we want to do. And even if you toss it away, it still has a lot of value to work with. But yeah, the big 3, the high profit 3 that we take a look at, what are those things we want to be thankful for in our lives? So research undoubtedly shows that the small things, family, the meals, a caring moment, a smile, a laugh, a thumbs up moment, all add to the precious moments of life. So how do we be mindful in trying to work with those precious moments in life itself? So to increase our happiness, realize again, you're in control of it. We showed that graph of about 40% of your happiness. You are definitely in control of it. Laughter is one of the best medicines, and it's very contagious if you're happy. And it also it's an emotion that transfers quite easily to spouses, to children, to friends, and community members as well. So the R stands for restore, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So yes, we want to take care of others, but we also want to make sure that we don't have an empty cup that we're trying to work from. So make your own health a priority for your mind, body, and soul. The exercise, the sleep, the hydration, sometimes just carrying that water bottle, getting a little extra water within our bodies and fueling your bodies with nutritious food, which is basically taking out a lot of the added sugars and the refined carbs. So some find running, reading, gardening, faith and community service, additional ways to fill their cup back up. And a lot of research will show that a lot of those things really do help people regain energy and a better mindset towards life. So you got to know what works for you. Okay, so take the time that makes your soul happy, smile, it relaxes, stores peace of mind, and make that smiling, making that laughter a habit, even when we don't feel like it. So, how do we learn from other people who inspire you? Okay, we don't want to just stay on a neutral plane here. Spend time with them, ask for their help, learn from others. It's amazing what we can learn simply by asking questions and being interested in what other people do know. Okay, it tends to make us feel more human as well, and actively share your goals, and especially on that farm, what are your expectations of other family members? Okay, and learn about their goals, and maybe it's a way for us to incorporate ours more into theirs. So now we're going to change gears again and talk about men and farm stress. And so I'm going to give credit to a lot of this from Randy Weigel, the University of Wyoming. Followed a lot of his work for years as well. So the traditional male identity, so that independence, that strong, that self-reliant, being competitive, being achievement oriented, powerful, adventurous, and emotionally restrained, okay, which may not be a very positive thing. But all those concepts that in that traditional male mind that leads to these attitudes about masculinity that men should not be feminists. So don't do any sissy stuff, okay? Strive to be respected, for successful achievement, okay, you got to be the big wheel, the big man on campus. Never show weakness, to be that sturdy yoke, which is why they tend to say, let's not cry, or big boys don't cry. And it's seeking adventure and risk, kind of that giving them hell type attitude. But those are kind of some traditional male role models that I think when we take a look at what men kind of tend to think, I think they're actually quite accurate when he says that. So the traditional view of being male causes some men to hesitate to ask for help because we need to be that sturdy yoke, and often for other people as well. So we're taught that masculine power, dominance, competition, and control are essential to proving one's masculinity. It's a performance type thing that men feel like they need to do. So we're taught that vulnerabilities, that our feelings, that our emotions are signs of femininity and are to be avoided, and that masculine control of others, ourselves, the environment are essential for men to feel safe, secure, and comfortable. So we find that just that word control, that when men are out of control with things that are happening on the farm or things in the family or with their life, it's something that causes a lot of stress for them. So taught that men seeking help and support from others is a sign of weakness or vulnerability, potential incompetence. When we take a look at men in stress and how do we try to embrace the crisis? Okay, so again, it's that internal locus of control. So embrace the crisis. We'll learn how strong you are and how strong you can be. Let the crisis teach you about yourself, because I think we all tend to grow through those difficulties, through the crisis moments in our lives, and realize that after this crisis, it tends to be kind of a grieving process as well. We're going to try to return to a new normal, but it probably isn't going to be the same. New meaning in life. Okay, it might be more or less than it was before, but it's going to be make sure that we're stronger because we had to go through that. So again, that locus of control, internal or external. Okay, so let's try to make it as best internal as we can, because 40% of that again is under our control. So refuse to be the victim or the blame game. So again, that's the external locus of control. Don't let it up to somebody else. We realize that an unforgiving spirit takes a lot of energy if we're being unforgiving of ourselves or unforgiving of somebody else. And yeah, we realize that we might be a victim of circumstance, but don't blame ourselves and don't blame others for what happened, or dig ourselves into a rut using that back part, that protective brain, to just put us into a rut and try to protect ourselves versus moving forward with it. So again, that locus of control. So we may not be in control of the crisis, but again, we can control our attitude to get that prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain, working and moving us forward. And remember that life has a purpose because you are alive, and so much more. Okay, and forgive those who wrong us and focus on love. Focus on mindfulness. Okay, walking in that valley of love and those little moments of life with our spouses, with our children, and just with life on the farm in general. So accept our emotions. Again, a difficult for men to do, especially if they're not feelers. Okay, so we have other types of personalities that may not be very touchy-feely or be very in touch with their feelings. So we need to accept those emotions. We need to deal with them. Okay, so laying in bed at night, the child's chest pounding, the mind racing, we can't get to sleep, thoughts of anger, failure, guilt, shame, even death might surface. So again, we need to accept those emotions as real, and that they're all good for a purpose, sometimes just protection, but we need to deal with them and think them through. So let's not deny those thoughts, but accept them as part of the learning experience. They're normal. That's who we are. So living with our emotions, sometimes we realize that that's painful. Okay, so sometimes sorting out the facts of different types of things isn't that painful, but the emotions tend to cause a lot of pain just in the joys and sorrows of life. And how do we try to build resolutions to persevere whatever stresses that we're dealing with? So how do we connect with other men? So sometimes, especially with COVID, we're introverts to begin with. A lot of us, we're out on the farm working by ourselves. It's not always easiest to connect with other men, okay? Because sometimes we're just not the greatest communicators, and that's just kind of in a general sense, not overall. So simple gestures from and to other men, just simple phone calls, texts can be very comforting to get involved with social support groups and things like that, farmer groups as well. It's not just for the women, for the men to get involved with those as well. So silence, on the other hand, okay, can lead to a lot of loneliness. It's invariably seen as judgment or lack of concern. Okay, so let's not be afraid to reach out to others and try to keep connected to the world itself. So in the same way, in the Dairy Girl acronym, stay away from negative people. Okay, unless we're trying to help them become more positive, because negative people can definitely bring us crashing down faster than sometimes our own negative thoughts. So research on stress and crisis as well as health issues shows that positive people with attitudes handle and recover from a crisis better than those with negative attitudes. Okay, it's that resilience type thing, and staying positive, mind over matter. So keep your sense of humor, and it's often said that laughers survive and survivors laugh. Okay, again, just it's a habit, smiling and laughing. So decide when to worry. I think this is a big topic that, some days, people are worrying day in and day out, 24/7. So if we worry about our crisis in the evening, sometimes it's going to keep us awake at night. And even if we don't, it might keep us awake at night because those thoughts are just filtering, and those emotions are working, and negative thoughts just sometimes just consume us. So how do we try to make it a practice that, yeah, we've got things in life to worry about? Okay, but can we limit our worry from 6 to 10 in the morning, or just a couple hours every morning, when we have more energy and we have a better attitude and a better thought process and trying to deal with it, instead, and then try to think about something to sublime about something else. Trade that worry for something more pleasant the rest of the day if we can. But I realize under a lot of dire stress, it's tough to get some of these things off our mind. So again, where is that locus of control, internal or external? So don't shut out your family. So when facing crisis, especially if we're introverted, sometimes we stonewall, men become quiet, withdrawn, and this can cause anxiety in other family members, which then causes more withdrawing within the family. So it's kind of a domino effect. When one person starts shutting down, stonewalling, it's kind of a domino effect. Other people might go to their rooms and the family quits communicating as much. So let the people in your family know how you're feeling, your worries, your fears, if you're okay. Do that with the kids in an age appropriate way, of course, but let them know how you're feeling. So again, that locus of control, internal. Okay, don't shut out your family. So taking care of yourself, there's a wealth of research just on the value of good health and handling stress and crisis. And hopefully through all these sessions, we've gone through quite a bit of that. But how does that positive attitude and our good health give us energy, to give us protection, and just a sense of control with who we are in life? And then also when we're under a lot of stress, to practice added safety. Okay, so when we're under a lot of stress, we don't eat so well. Again, the added sugars and the junk carbs. We don't exercise quite as much as we probably should. We probably are lacking a lot of sleep, and sleep is one of those biggest things that we want to make sure we get enough of, and how to rely on your faith to pull you through, because research has shown prayer to be a very positive tool, meditation and healing and life's quality itself. So believe in tomorrow. There may be a reason this crisis is happening to you. Maybe part of your job is to find out why, because it will teach you something about yourself. So keep telling yourself that I will survive. I will get through this. I can do it. The future is promising in so many ways. And just believe that you will be there to see that future through, that light at the end of the tunnel, even though it might seem dim now, but you'll be there to see that bright future as you have it, as it comes to you. So the weakness is that anybody can give up, but it's only the strong that will continue to battle. And men can use that male identity about taking the bull by the horns and using other types of mindset strategies to deal with a crisis or a stress in competitive ways. And I look at that thought process of taking the bull by the horns, and how many times I've been on a farm with families in distress, and that concept comes up. We're just got to take the bull by the horns, and we're going to see this thing through. So rural men tend to be introverted, as we mentioned several times. So taking more of an inward approach, even during stressful times, and might cause us to withdraw. And so how do we do the opposite of encouraging and helping connections while respecting that needed time to privately process for the introvert, because that's how they regain their energy is pretty important. So the bottom line is don't keep yourself or live in the dark. Okay, get out, make those connections, encourage each other, and then hopefully there'll be some encouragement to you as well. So now we're going to switch gears again. So we talked about women in stress, we talked about men in stress, and now we're going to talk about the kids. And what do you tell them? So it starts with healthy marriages because they do tend to have arguments, even when conflict and challenging each other. Struggles that actually can increase marital bonding, because we realize that couples that actually struggle, they go through conflict, they might have experienced a tragedy or a turbulent time together that can actually bond them as a family. But we also realize that unhealthy conflict can fester and divide. So we got to watch it from both sides of the coin. So healthy marriages tend to lead to healthy parenting, and healthy parenting tends to lead to healthy kids. So when we talk about kids, the best thing you can do for these kids is to have a healthy marriage, okay? Because that's going to infiltrate through your parenting skills and it's going to infiltrate to the kids. So make sure we're taking care of the marriage first and foremost. So to be conflict careful. So all marriages are going to have conflict, but let's be conflict careful around the kids, as they often imagine and they think the worst. So one small little argument, the kids are going to think the worst, that mom and dad are getting divorced. Okay, just with a small argument, they magnify it, they make it bigger than it really is. Okay, so simple things, they imagine it first the worst, and then they also magnify it, make it bigger than what really is, and then they start to internalize it. Okay, it's my fault why mom and dad aren't getting along, or if I only I would have done this chore, if I would have said something. Okay, so imagine, magnify, and internalize, I think, are three things to remember is what kids are going through their minds sometimes when they have different types of issues. So as a result, kids might act out, okay, whether at home, at school, whatever. They may actually do the opposite of turning inward, okay? They might have trouble focusing, when they take a look at poor academic performance or other types of academic performance, how important it is for us to be able to focus. They might have relationship issues and just problems interacting with different other kids or with parents and things like that. So when we take a look at conflict that we might have in a marriage, that affects the parenting, and again, that's going to affect the kids as well in how they behave. So learning opportunities definitely abound on the farm, but growing up on a farm can also bring challenges for youth as well. But we realize again that those challenges are normal and they can be healthy as they push youth to do things that promote healthy growth. Okay, and again, that's how we grow as people. So it's in that process of dealing with those challenges, those difficulties that provide that deeper meaning in life and can help kids especially develop this life skill of mastery. When they overcame a problem, they develop that skill of mastery. So it's the ability to both conceptualize and actually actualize solving a problem, create a project, communicate an idea, achieve a life skill. So I think it's pretty important sometimes just to have them put down the phones, okay, get rid of the TV and just get outside to do something, to create a project and have mastery to achieve, like I said, these life skills, or to deal with the skill to just to manage an opportunity. So how do we develop this mastery over life's more down times as well? And so if we can develop mastery in the good times, they can use those skills when things aren't going so well. So I'm going to borrow a few things here from Lori Corthell's a human science specialist with Iowa State, a colleague of mine. So when you take a look at kids, they realize that their brains are still developed. So between the ages of 21, 24, their brains start getting pretty developed, okay? But younger well, than that, I mean, their brains are definitely still developing. They're undergoing some chemical changes that can make understanding some things a little bit more difficult. So 3 tips: go to their space, digest it in bits and pieces, and listen to them. So let's go through each one individually. So we're not talking just about physical space, but also conversational space. So where is your teen most comfortable to talk, and how do they prefer to talk? Okay, so I realize that my kids, that prayer time, that bedtime, just before they go to sleep, if I want them to remember something, that's when I will try to tell them, because they're going to sleep on it without other things, hopefully mangling their mind up or whatever. So whenever, how do they prefer? And I know sometimes as my kids go to bed as well, it's just amazing that I'm ready for bed and all of a sudden now my kid wants to talk. So what does dear old dad do? If that's the opportunity to talk, by all means, I'm there. Okay, so when we take a look at simple things like just sending a text or a note about something you want to talk about, let them kind of process the written message, and maybe having a face-to-face conversation a little bit later. But how do we just kind of in bits and pieces go to both of their space and kind of digest it in bits and pieces? So when we are a little bit older, or maybe a lot older, we take a look at all the years of experience that we've had in digesting this experience and digesting that. Teenagers haven't had those experiences. Okay, so a lot of their experiences might come from social media, this, that, or the other thing. So their brain doesn't necessarily have that full processing capacity or the experience. Okay, so we want to have this big conversation. How do we digest it in bits and pieces, focusing on key points, and maybe trying to come back to help them remind those key points from time to time, and visiting, which is kind of leads into the revisiting of the conversation. Okay, so when we take a look at conversations, a lot of times when we talk with somebody, our brains kind of get stuck in just maybe one or two words that they said, and we're still trying to kind of process what they truly meant by that. And there are 3 or 4 more paragraphs down the conversation, and we didn't even hear the rest of it. Okay, so that happens to kids as well. So don't be afraid to revisit these conversations. Okay, and so sometimes we might not be ready to actually have these conversations. Their teens might want to have the conversation at that point, so we can do what we can, but we also want to revisit them as well. And then the bottom line is to listen to them. So to hear what they're actually saying, and like Lori says here, that a lot of it might be insignificant, but they also might be asking for your guidance or helping your understanding what's going on in the world. So I've got a daughter that sometimes says to me, Dad, I want your advice on this. Not saying I'm going to take it, but I want your advice. Okay, so when we take a look at, they do ask for guidance. They might not take it, but at least we share our thoughts with them. So speak and hear skills are both important. I'm going to take a look at, when we take a look at just the positive words, and I like to use a 5 to 1 rule. Sometimes we'll use a 20 to 1 rule. Is that how can we say 5 or 6 positive things, or 10 positive things, or maybe even 20 positive things for every negative thing that we have? Okay, so it might be a little far-fetched to go to the 20, but again, it brings out the thought process of the habit of saying positive things, so that when we need to talk to kids about not so positive things, we actually can set the stage and actually couch them a little bit better. Okay, so words that are gentle, non-threatening. Okay, when we take a look at our body language of how we can try to engage them into the conversation. Okay, so anything that we do that's threatening, sternness, okay, that I'm the dad, you're the kid type thought process. Okay, so sometimes we need to do that, but there's other times we need to just kind of befriend them and say, I sympathize or empathize with what you're saying here. Let's talk about that. Okay, so I statements, I feel this, I'm thinking this. Okay, so when you say this or when you do this, it makes me feel. Okay, so a lot of those I statements, when we take a look at, just be specific about what behavior you're really trying to work with the kids. So, what do you tell the kids when they're down with den of denial? And you can read these. I didn't realize there are so many negative words that actually started with D. Okay, but when you take a look at some of these, kids experience a lot of disgust. Sometimes they experience distrust, and those aren't even, I think, on the list. When you take a look at some of those things and they're experiencing these things, what do you do when they're down? Okay, and we look at the depression. So if I look at these 6 kids that are in this picture, 4 of these are female. So odds are that 1 out of these 4 young ladies will actually experience severe depression at some point in your life, in their life. Okay, so which one of those 4 is it? Okay, and a lot of times if it's your children, you can't tell what's going on. Sometimes it might be the one that's got the higher personality trait of the feeling and the emotion into them that it might affect the most, but you really can't tell. So when youth are down, what do you tell the kids? So this little slide just on farm youth psychology 101, the power of positive reality. So thoughts are precursors to feelings and precursors to action. So if we want our kids to feel good about themselves, let's help them step back and think good about themselves, first of all, to help them feel good about themselves, which will actually translate into more positive actions or whatever. So kids have these pictures in their minds that actually transfer into their attitudes, which actually transfer into their behaviors as well. Different types of ideas, values transfer into their habits. Okay, so their perceptions, their principles, it transfers into their performance. the mission of who they are, how do they identify in life, transfers into their decisions. So whatever they focus on in life, it tends to become those things that they define themselves, and it actually becomes their reality. Okay, so how do we help them have a positive focus, a positive definition of who they are to get to that positive reality? Because that's the overall goal. So well-adjusted youth. So they tend to come from well-adjusted parents. So modeling healthy behavior is so key. And so sometimes when maybe I would have a son that might slam the door, instead of yelling at him for slamming the door, I might just ask myself, I wonder where he learned that door slamming technique from. And how do we witness unhealthy conflict? Okay, just so when they witness unhealthy conflict, realize it can be very unhealthy or harmful to them, because those pictures of unhealthy conflict, and I still remember some of the unhealthy conflict of a farm family. We were a normal farm family growing up. I still remember and have a picture in my mind some of those days when somebody got a little irritated and there was a little fight that happened on the farm. Okay, with four brothers and a few other siblings as well. You can only imagine we didn't always get along. So farm and family stress can cause youth to be anxious, scared, sleepless. Okay, so in the same respect, when there's conflict, okay, they may turn inward, they may act out, have trouble interacting, concentrating, as we talked a little bit about the previous slide. So all families have some conflict, they have challenges, or they're not normal. Okay, so conflict is a part of it. So it's more important to deal with the youth's thoughts more than their feelings, from the psychologist John Roseman, as often parents give overt attention to children's feelings. And I see this happening with younger parents more and more, okay, at the expense of well-adjusted thought processes to help them better deal with their feelings. Okay, so one of the things is that a lot of times it seems like we really try to sympathize with our kids' feelings. And I tend to say that sympathizing with kids' feelings tend to help them feel sorry for themselves versus empathizing with their feelings to help them work through the thoughts and the processes of what's going on with that. So again, sympathy helps one feel sorry for oneself. Empathy helps understanding of the situation. So anytime we experience grief, we realize that sympathy may be the needed form of compassion. Okay, but hopefully it moves to empathy over time to help them think through that grief. So if you see a fox in a hole, I just use this as an example. Do you look with pity on that fox and do you move on? Or do you sit with that fox and try to talk to them about their situation and how they can best deal with it? Okay, again, empathy is a more important part. So acknowledging their thoughts, I understand, that seems to me you're thinking this. Empathize with their feelings. I sense that you must feel. Okay, so it's kind of going both ways again with thoughts and feelings. So how do we talk meaning to kids and help them at an early, so we're going after this definition and their reality and understanding what reality is. How do we help you see and appreciate the meaning of those small good things in their lives starting from an early age on? Because they find greater happiness and satisfaction even amongst difficulty, and they help understand the bigger meaning of life and what they are as a part of a bigger life. How do you help kids talk definition of who they are and their strengths, ability? Okay, so we've got, it seems like a lot of youth, if they're not athletic or musically talented, what are they? Okay, so character traits are extremely important to call attention to their goodness, call attention to their kindness, to their compassion. And again, to use that word encourage. While it is still today 5-to-1 positive things to encourage them to become you in all that you do, not to become me as a dad, but to become who that kid is destined to be. So then we talked, that third piece of this is positive reality. Okay, so think good, to feel good about themselves. Do they see themselves as weak or maybe sometimes down in a hole, or do they see themselves as sitting on top of the world? Okay, because both humility and confidence need to be learned in their internal reality. Okay, in their locus of control, humility and confidence is a part of that as well. So focus on the positive, learn from the rest. Again, proactive, not passive, internal locus of control to try to help those kids develop that. So we talk relative. Okay, so don't, okay, so how do we help them not magnify these problems? Okay, so a lot of times farm youth, they might not have all the money and all the technology and all the gadgets that other kids do. But again, the talk of meaning, the definition, their reality, and how blessed they truly are compared to youth around the world. Okay, so sometimes relativism isn't the best thing to do, but sometimes it actually can help quite, so they just kind of understand how blessed they truly are, even though they don't have it all. So how do we talk respect? The development of humility and the sense of respect for others and for the world around them. When you take a look at the respect for parents, for teachers, coaches, their role models. Okay, so I tend to say that humility is often a more important interpersonal value than pride. So a lot of parents, they seem like they want to teach their kids to have pride in themselves, okay, confidence in themselves, self-esteem. Let's not forget the true value of that virtue of humility, okay, especially for communication skills early in life, because sometimes it takes humility to actually carry out some of those communication skills, not just telling somebody what to do with all that pride and sometimes arrogance that it might actually develop into. So how do we talk joy? I shared this with the session with the adults as well. So to become genuinely interested, again, that eye contact and that focus, being appreciative, gratitude, being accepting, yet disciplined in righteousness, to teach them right from wrong, that everything just isn't relative when you talk about moral principles. So being joyful, seeing blessings even in the sorrowful moments of life, to be respectful, joking, affectionate, empathetic, using that tender touch and talk to their level. So we realize there's a big height difference, that adults can be very intimidating to kids because tends to be associated with power. So sitting or kneeling, getting closer to their level can often help improve communication response, that eye-to-eye contact. So we're at the level. So I know with kids and grandkids, sometimes it's nicer just to get down on the floor to talk with them, but it really depends if is this a parent-child type communication, or do you want to kind of be a little friend or just get to know and play with them? And so to be at their level for different types of things, but talk to their level. So talk in their time. Youth are not always as talkative, when their minds are occupied someplace else. So we always found that meal times and car time, especially family game time, bedtime, prayer time, are more responsive times when they might want to try to talk, because a lot of times they don't want to go to sleep. So then maybe they will start talking with that. So I learned the hard way just what me time was. Okay, so one time I was in the car with one of my children, and we were talking and talking, and one of my daughters just turned to me and goes, "Dad, do you know what me time is?" Okay, so sometimes they just want their quiet time to process without us just always talking as well. So talk their talk. So how do we relate to them? Okay, so word pictures tend to be, I think, a good thing to do to try to connect their picture. Okay, so word pictures, we're trying to create something as if. So here we're taking a look at a word picture of canoeing. As we take a look at, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of paddling to try to keep that on course, because if this canoe just was left on its own to wander, it might drift in the wrong direction or drift to the side or get ourselves caught in some trouble. And so it's just kind of a word picture to try to keep kids on course. So youth tend not to be proactive in talking, so it's kind of like boating. So if it's again left to the natural currents that I was just mentioning too, that conversation needs a little direction to work with it as well. Otherwise, our communication can drift away as well. So talk their walk. Youth nowadays undoubtedly growing up in a very complicated environment with their cell phones and with all the social media type issues, the bullying and things like that, which I know some of those things happened back when we were kids as well. Okay, so our farm and family stress, I think the important part is it might actually pale in comparison to some of the things that they may be handling socially at school, again, brought on by the technologies, social media, things like that. So when their walk is less than good, we realize that youth need support. They need security. They need safety measures. They know that they're not alone and that their family is their safe haven when those boundaries and the fundamentals of life. And so I think of fundamentals of life, make sure we have fun, but it's also a mental process as well. So they need the safety, the boundaries, but help them see the fun, see the meaning in life, and the mental challenge of thinking through life. So at times, conversations with youth just need a longer, soothing break. So sometimes we might get into a little argument with our children. Can we just take some time and just kind of say, let's take 20 minutes and let's think about this. You decide what you want to do. I'll decide what I want to do. And let's see if we can come together on something like that. So the bids for connections, I shared this with one of the other sessions as well. I'm going to go through it again because, again, I think I said last time that if I only remember one thing from this presentation, I hope it's this one. Okay, so this happiness index. Anytime a kid makes a bid for a connection, we as parents have a very important role to play. So we can turn away with a negative mindset, ignoring that the kid made a bid. We can just turn away, tug our shoulder the other way. without even saying anything, it tells those kids a lot that my bid for connection is not welcome today. And hopefully it's welcome tomorrow. Hopefully it's welcome next time. But hopefully that bid for connection is always welcome within our minds so that the kids kind of feel that they can always make some bid for connection. Or we can turn against, and this is kind of more of a negative mindset. Well, can't you see that I'm busy? Or why waste your time and money, okay, on something that's so silly? Or we can turn towards. Okay, so my challenge to everybody that's listening and watching is that how can we 100% of the time turn towards anybody that makes a bid for a connection, as long as it's a reasonable bid, with the tune that, well, that sounds fun, that's interesting, with both my body language and my emotions and my words. I want to try to invite them. Well, that's interesting. Thanks for mentioning that. Okay. Can you tell me more? Okay. And so even if we don't have time with it, at least turn to a positive attention towards them. And then we can deal with things like a little bit later that if we don't have time, we still turn towards them and then share why. Again, that turning towards, it's a habit. Okay. Invite them to share more and let them know that they can always turn towards you as a parent to deal with whatever issues they are. So in our bids for connections, we send messages of giving advice. Well, you need to do it this way. There's an easy fix for that, or why not do it that way? Versus unhelpful messages of acknowledging their thought, or helpful messages, excuse me, acknowledging their thoughts and their feelings, like it seems important to me that. Okay, so giving advice versus just acknowledging their feelings. Or we can talk about our feelings rather than validate theirs. And on the helpful side, we can invite more discussion. Well, I'd like to understand more about that, or what difference is that going to make? Or on the unhelpful side, we can make their pain, make whatever they said feel unimportant, like you'll get over it, or that's not a big deal. Okay, versus acknowledge the pain. Okay, well, that must be a tough situation, or you must feel awful. Okay, so unhelpful messages versus helpful messages. Always turn toward and hopefully give a helpful message. So how do you help them paint a positive picture of themselves and others? Because when we have farm stress or whatever kind of stresses we have in our lives, we realize that youth can often rise to the occasion, help out dealing with the problem if supported with clear and caring communication. So we also realize that protecting loved ones from bad news is not always best. Okay, kids will actually kind of figure this out over time. Okay, kids may be aware something's happening, feeling emotionally charged, but why isn't mom or dad telling me? Okay, I know something's going on, but I'm not old enough or something for them to even tell me. Okay, so we don't want kids to develop the mistrust if they're not told the truth. Okay, so again, make it age appropriate, but give them the chance to appreciate the real concerns of the farm family. Teach the youth to deal with difficulty. Again, building resiliency in them. So bring them along in the discussions rather than just announce the bottom line, well, the farm's getting sold. Okay, let's take them along with the discussions that we're having financial problems, or there's a few things that are happening, or we might be deciding to do something different. Let them know that they are loved and they didn't cause this. Again, as they often kind of magnify these, they tend to blame themselves. And so let them know that they were not the cause of this. Listen to them without criticizing their worries, because it's just helpful for them to be able to talk about what they want to talk about and check their level of understanding. And know that the 1 minute chats, just gentle hugs, just a reassuring word, best way to communicate with youth under stress. Okay, especially just that pat on the back and just let them know that they're loved and we can do something fun here, get their mind off it as well. So increasing the joy in relationships, again, that eye contact, putting the phone down, pausing the TV when somebody's trying to chat with us, whether it be a spouse or a child. Be affectionate, empathetic. That tender touch with kids, I think, is extremely important. That attitude or gratitude about just how appreciative we are of who you are becoming, what you're doing in life. I appreciate this task that you did for me. Okay, be accepting yet disciplined in tolerance, and share your joy. Sometimes I think so much stress happens on the farm that we forget those simple joys that are happening, the birth of a calf, or some birds, some cats, or whatever, things that are happening out in nature, and just share those joys and those sunsets and the sunrises and the simple things in life with those kids, and to joke around with them respectfully without trying to dig at them. So we talked about women in stress, men in stress, kids in stress. Now, what to do about you? Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few things that I just try to incorporate into some of the days based on a lot of research that I've read, and how you start your day with a forward routine. Connecting to the world both visually, physically, mindfully as well. Okay, so just getting out and seeing the open pasture, or just walking outside and seeing the horizon. Okay, connecting ourselves to the world is important for that visual horizon, and sometimes that horizon is mesmerizing as well. How do we be mindful and be that just being present, and our presence is the real gift in life? Okay, be present to our kids, be present to our spouse. Gratitude is the best attitude, and generosity, research will show, just the things that you do for others, you truly do a lot for yourself when you do things for other people. And I realize sometimes stress causes us, we got too many things to just get done ourselves that we can't even think about doing things for other people. One that I heard yesterday, just don't should on yourselves about I should have done this and I should have done that, or other people should have done this for me, or they should have done that. Okay, let's not do that with ourselves. So another one, just be selfish. Okay, that ISH can stand for I see happy, healthy, and hopeful. Okay, so a lot of times we do need to make sure that we're taking our care of ourselves, because again, like the Dairy Girl acronym, we can't pour from an empty cup. So break, and sometimes get our mind to a break, because we can actually get some breakthroughs, and sometimes let the solutions to find us before the breakdown finds us. How do you keep a pace? And sometimes we need to slow down to actually hurry up and to get more done. But the pace to stay in the race, dare not to compare. Okay, especially with people and what other people are doing, just because we realize that a lot of kids are growing up, especially with a lot of jealousy because of social media and these false spectacles of life that are being portrayed in social media. How do we manage our expectations? Okay, and whoever we are on the farm, especially if we're that daughter-in-law of the farm that's kind of lost in all these different expectations of me coming into this farm family now. So manage those expectations so we don't have to manage the ramifications later on. Seek mindful payoffs. What are those top 3 things of the day that we want to try working with versus lazy layoffs? Okay, that couch potato type person that has these stress and problems, and we're just not going to deal with them. We're just going to munch and watch TV, and maybe not get the sleep that we need and things like that. Because the bottom line, sleep, diet, and exercise are undoubtedly the best apps for us to have happy apps within our life. So when we take a look at stress, as we take a look again, men, women, and children, there's stress resources, the Iowa Concern Hotline, that phone number 800-447-1985 is available 24/7. They've also got some other types of counseling that they do with that as well. Live chats, the Healthy Families line, they've got a teen line there as well. Mental health impact for farm families collection from the National Ag Safety Database. There's a lot of resources there. There's a lot of resources on our website as well. And so as we go through this, I hope you have gleaned at least a few things with it. I'd like to start to begin to close with a meditative prayer in caring for you and yours. So again, whoever we want to pray for or to or with, to help me to use my knowledge and my empathy to better understand and handle the stresses in life, to manage concerns, conflict, and conversation when dealing with the men, women, and children in our farm, family, and community relationships, deep breathing with active goals and exercise, implementing change as needed in an internal locus of control, remembering our team and our bigger why in life, using generosity and gratitude to increase happiness and to restore our health of mind, body, and soul, learning every day to appreciate the blessings today. Again, all for our greater why in life. Amen. So again, the weight of distress and the strength of resiliency. Mind over matter when something's the matter. The weight that we carry on our shoulders, the weight that we can aspire to carry by building resiliency, to do this no matter what's the matter, to face the challenge with courage, that I can do this, I got this, and to do something, be very proactive, or those worries can actually magnify if we don't do something about it right away.
Okay, we have got a bunch of really great questions, Larry. First one is from a farm wife. You'd mentioned implementing time management. Doesn't everybody have to help participate to make that work?
Okay, so with time management, you said it's coming from a farm wife, which doesn't
Yep.
surprise me because the ones that are most stressed out about time tend to be the women. And so I think when Jen puts up the Dairy Girl acronym, I think it's pretty good just about that. Take 10 minutes. Okay, I know we're busy, but even be able to write those couple things down in the morning, about 3 or 4 things that we for sure need to do, in addition to those things at night, even if it's just for a minute or so, just to jot down 3 blessings of the day to just think about. No matter how stressed this day was, I still remember those 3 things that I really want to kind of be mindful of, and remember that this is one of the kids, or one of the kids did this, or some positive things that happened within the life. So that time management is just something, if we don't take the time to be mindful and better manage our time, and we have those low margins of time, what tends to happen is that our brain is going to work on in the protective brain, the back part of our brain, and we're always going to be more of our thought process of hesitation. Okay, we're going to take a look at, well, maybe I should have done this. We're going to kind of have a lot more doubts in our mind about, can we do this or whatever. So what really happens in that time management, if we're not mindful of that time, again, we don't get sometimes our prefrontal cortex, that higher reasoning part of our mind actually working, which is basically what we're going to talk about a lot next week, is just that we get stuck in those ruts. Okay, so margins of time, for a long period of time, and for weeks, for months, and sometimes for some women, it's not just women, but for men as well, they get stuck in those time margin ruts, and they never get a chance to really kind of get a break from that, to move on. Okay, so however you can do it, I think we kind of share a lot of different ideas about trying to work with it. But again, we tend to be a little more efficient if we write a couple things down about what we really need to do, so we don't forget. That procrastination tends to be a big one as well. And so when we get up in the morning and we just really think about moving forward with something in the morning. So people that tend to have routine, of whether it be making their bed, or cleaning their room, making their coffee, just doing something. And when we take a look at that screen time that people tend to have with these phones, especially early in the morning, I think it's one of the biggest inhibitors to help people, that keep people from actually looking forward in the morning, because all they're doing is, doing a lot of social media, and they got to keep up because that might be their social context. But how do you get outside, look at the horizon, just do some things, whether it be a little bit of an exercise or whatever, something that moves the body forward and something that moves the mind forward, research shows will be a big thing. And so time management is moving something forward.
Thank you, Larry. This is a question that I don't think we touched on. How do you handle the stress of an injury, especially a long-term injury, amidst all the pandemic and issues we have?
Okay, that's actually a kind of a great question. And I think I've kind of had to work that a few times with shoulders and knees and things like that, and being laid up. So one thing that tends to happen with injuries is that we become so much more inactive. And so when you become inactive, what do? You start craving more junk foods, again, the processed carbs, the refined, the sugars and things like that. Okay, so we become a little, what's the word for it? Just a little lazier, nonchalant or whatever. And so when you take a look at these long-term ones, I think people that are on long-term injuries actually need to probably process things through even a little bit more, because if they can't be physically active in some respects, it becomes more difficult. But even if they are physically active, so if a knee's the problem, which I've had, so I had to focus a lot more on just, what can I do with my upper body strength, ab strength, and just things that kind of keep myself moving. Again, because that body sitting by itself, it's just not a healthy thing. Okay, so if it's a shoulder thing, then can I do something with my legs a little bit more or whatever? But just being active, I think, no matter what it is. And then that social support. So now we might not be able to go out quite as much, or even with COVID, we can't go out quite as much. But how do you keep that active support? By giving somebody a phone call, not just texting, but physically having a conversation with somebody. And the other thing I think when we take a look at, just talk about the screen time, and then my phone goes off. So when you take a look at the, people, especially in the wintertime, where people's depression actually gets to higher levels just because they don't see as much sunlight and things like that. So even when we're laid up, we still need to have this thought process. We got to get outside the house sometimes. We got to get out in nature, some of those natural healers that we work with. And I think another big one is is music that we haven't talked about very much. And some people like music more than others. I'm kind of fanatic, I guess, myself with it. But one thing about music is that it reaches just about every part of the brain. So it's the words, it's the sound and things like that, the rhythms and things like that. They're actually quite healthy for the brain in a lot of different ways. Okay, so water is another one. So if we can kind of work with massages and hot tubs, things like that. So water is another big one, but simple things like that can actually keep us moving forward versus just being a couch potato when we are kind of laid up.
Thank you, Larry. And I just happen to have Miss Sharon here, my bride, when you mentioned a hot tub. So appreciate the help there.
Not a problem there. I sure like mine.
You talked about the importance of sleep, and especially when you're stressed and things are hurting. And what about sleeping pills to get the sleep we need?
Okay, so I'm not gonna probably touch that one quite as much because I'm not a licensed psychiatrist or anything like that. Okay, so sometimes there might be a few instances. I'm just going to kind of personal example. There are times when I might just take one sleeping pill. So it's kind of like a half a dose if I really have a problem getting to sleep for one reason or another. Okay, but it's not something I would encourage people to do long term. Okay, but that's something they should talk to their doctor about. I'm not qualified to really answer that one.
Thank you.
I was just going to comment on the sleep thing. It could go back to your cell phone as well, right, Larry? If we have that blue light at night, shutting that off before bedtime is a huge thing for sleep too.
Yeah,
So
so our
that's something
family
to
is
think-
actually, I was pretty prominent or important for our kids and my wife to actually get the blue light glasses. So if they're going to be on their cell phones before they go to bed, another concept for the kids is just take it away from them before they go to bed. Don't let them sleep with it and try to get it out of their minds, because I think it's important to get those cell phones, especially for young kids, out of their rooms. Okay, so 9 o'clock at night, can we get them out of the room? All the family keeps them in a basket or something like that. They get them back the next morning, all nice and charged up. Otherwise, sometimes those kids sit there, all night long, just texting and things like that, and just every little beep that comes through. But I think as we take a look at sleep, it's just one of the things that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more next week too. It's difficult for dairy farmers to get that much more sleep. But again, when we take a look at all those brain health practices, if we don't get enough sleep, it just seems like our brain just does not work the way it should. And irritability and short-term thinking, just those things that we don't want to have happen actually tend to happen when we don't get enough sleep.
And this question points out that our kids didn't have a choice in what's going on in our life now. How do we even start? How do you introduce the idea that, the auctioneer is coming tomorrow to look at the cows and we may have to sell?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is I would kind of sit down there. There's, a time to be a parent-child relationship. Situations like that, so I think a pretty good time to just to be a friend-friend relationship with the kid, and just sit down, get down to their level, go out for a walk with them, and just or take them for a ride in the car. It's always one of the nicest things, I think, are opportunities for be able to talk to kids. Let's go take a drive here because they're so confined and we have to pay attention. And you can focus on the road. You really don't have to even look at each other that much. So when you take a look at that, I guess I would just kind of try to put it in chunks and pieces. The piece that I shared about, with your colleague Lori out there in the Northwest, I just think those are some pretty pertinent pieces about how you really digest this a little bit by little bit. That, can we like take them on a ride and just kind of mention, well, this is kind of how it started, and this is kind of what got us to here. And again, make it age appropriate, because these young kids don't need to know all the details. The younger ones that are teenagers, I would tend to say, boy, I'd be sharing a lot of details with them as well, because they're going to have problems in their life, and they need to know how mom and dad decided to do this, and they got to make sure that they have mastery over those difficulties, build their own resiliency over those difficulties over time. But again, to help them digest in bits and pieces, bring the conversation back, because they're only going to remember maybe 1 or 2, 3 things. Okay, and there's going to be a lot of detail with that, but what are the top 3 things you want them to remember? So one of the things I always say is that people can remember 3 things. So if I'm doing a homily, I try to have maybe 3 major points and maybe 3 minor points under each one of those, but I try to do things in threes, because I know people can remember all 3 things. So do you remember all 3 things I just said, Fred? I'm just kidding.
Test question. Boy, I hate those. We've got two more questions I'd like to include here. You'd mentioned in one of the slides that, you have to find positive words. If we have a problem, how do you find positive words?
Okay, so there's a technique out there, just how do you try to couch things? So even if you can't find some positive words, how do you couch this? And so let's take a little young kid and we'll take those three things about they internalize and they magnify things. Okay, so when we take a look at how do they do that? So now we kind of might have to unmagnify it and, again, the smaller bits and pieces. So when you take a look at these young kids, it's just to try to make the approach that, this thing happened and maybe this is the cause of it. You can kind of go through some of the causations of what have been happening, but kind of sometimes stepping them back before we can actually move them forward in some of these negative things that are happening to it. But I guess I would always also take the thought process, when you take a look at negative things that happen to our lives, and I think a lot of us that are adults and a little more aged, not so much young like Jen, but the older ones have those more experiences where how do you try to help kids and reframe something more positive out of it? Because we realize a lot of negative things that happened in our lives 15, 20 years later actually turned out to be a positive thing for us. Okay, so how do you take that thing? And I love the Dairy Girl concept thing about just reframing. Okay, so something that is negative and just how do you try to see the blessing out of that? And if it's not a blessing, how do you at least learn and grow from the difficulty that you just experienced with it?
Okay, this last one, I'm, it came in from a man, but I'm asking it on behalf of all of the men out there. Sometimes I say something that I think can lighten the mood, and when I turn around and look in her eyes, it was taken as a dig and I hurt her feelings. What's the test that I can do to not have that happen so often?
Did I write that one? Okay, so I think there's a couple of things that are going on here. Okay, so first of all, is our intent. Okay, so I think I'm going to talk from the female side, but I'm going to actually decipher this one a little bit. So as women, we tend to have a little higher emotion, both positive and negative, but sometimes that negative emotion sometimes might override that positive emotion. Okay, so it might be heard with more of a negative intent than a positive intent, even though the male person might have thought that was something kind of positive, kind of funny. I know my wife and my kids, they do not appreciate my sense of humor the way I do. Okay, and so just what's the intent when we listen to people? So this goes for everybody, is just how can we try to think more positively about the intent that people have when they speak to us? Because I think a lot of times when, especially if we're in the back part of our brain, something bad just happened. Okay, so now we're kind of protecting ourselves and we're going to think the worst sometimes when somebody says something to us, because again, we're in that protection mode. So I think it's kind of an intent type thing. Or people, the feeler type people tend to take things a little bit more personal. Okay, but again, how do we appreciate it? I think that joking around and things like that, I think are very positive for relationships. But I think the bottom line is that thing, and that's why I should underline that piece about no digs, because it's amazing how sometimes, especially spouses, but parents do this to kids do this to their parents, is that they always want to get that little dig in. And it's kind of a power type thing where I'm proving that I'm just a little bit better than you, or I made a little better decision, or you shouldn't be doing this or whatever. Okay, so we always kind of, seems like we kind of put ourselves on a pedestal and thinking of ourselves and the way we can make ourselves look at least equal or sometimes better than people are by putting other people down, which is kind of that dig phase of it. So how do we try not to do that dig? I know that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but that's what you tend to get with me, right?
Very good. Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat, so I will turn it over to Jen to close up the program.
All right. Well, great questions here tonight as we conclude our third webinar. And, we're going to wrap up next week, next Tuesday night, focusing on some of those brain and behavioral health hacks to mitigate some of that stress. So I think, Larry, you were kind of already alluding to some of that here with a question and an answer tonight. So I think it'll be